Welcome to Jurassic Park.
You're gonna need a bigger boat.
Why don't we just wait here for a little while?
Do you want to know what it is?
There's no knowing where you might be swept off to.
Help me, Obi-Wan Kenobi. You're my only hope.
Shepherds we shall be, for thee, my Lord, for thee.
I don't know. I'm making this up as I go.
There's a special rug in hell reserved for people who waste good scotch.
He peed on my rug!
He peed on the dude's rug.
Do your worst.
Final report of the commercial starship Nostromo.
Roads? Where we're going, we don't need roads.
Welcome to your feature presentation, the podcast where we explore the latest movies and all things cinema. Today we're talking about The Rings of Power. People hate it, people love it. We're going to get into it. With me, as always, the popcorn sage himself, the movie buffoon, Andrew McKay.
Wow. I prefer Cinemad Max or Movie Mike a Lot or Cinema Sizzle.
Cinema Sizzle. Well,
Cinema Sizzle.
That's what your wife calls you.
Oh, hey.
Heyo. All right, so we're going to start off with movies coming out this weekend. We got a couple new movies for you.
Mm-hmm.
What would you like to start with?
So first up, we have Speak No Evil. This is about a family that is invited to spend a weekend in an idyllic country house, unaware that their dream vacation will soon become a psychological nightmare. It says James McAvoy, Mackenzie Davis. Let's see, who else do you know?
I'm pretty excited about this one, too.
Yeah.
I think it's interesting, like, James McAvoy started off as, like, one of his bigger roles was Fawn from the Chronicles of Narnia.
Oh, yeah.
And then he transcended to, like, Split and even just, like, X-Men movies. It's cool to see kind of like a semi-diverse, role.
Yeah.
I'm excited about this movie. I was thinking about it, and it kind of feels like such a modern-day kind of ideal situation to start with. I was like, as like a young married couple, or you're with your significant other and you go on vacation, like what's more fun than connecting with like another couple?
Yeah,
that's like, hey, we went to this place and didn't know anybody, but then we made friends and we got drinks and we had fun. That's kind of like such a that's a fun thing. People talk about that, right? Like vacation friends you made,
Oh yeah, that's happened to us. Like we've left the country and we've met people from Michigan that live 15 minutes from us.
Yeah.
And we've actually, one of the times we left the country, we went on like a little snorkeling ship and met someone that works one floor below my wife at the same place.
That's insane.
Yeah, it was weird. So that stuff happens all the time. Like,
yeah. Well, and especially like I was thinking when me and my wife went to Mexico for our honeymoon, like we met people and sometimes you're like, oh, you speak English.
Yeah.
We're friends now. Because like, do you guys know what's happening right now? So that's always fun. But this movie, I think, takes that, which is such a kind of fun thing to happen in our society. And then it's like, it goes terribly wrong.
It ruins it for us.
Yeah, exactly. Which is like, I love it when things play on real fears or real life situations. Like, imagine, like The Visit. Go stay with Grandpa and Grandma.
Yeah.
What can happen? You're gonna be fine.
Yeah. Or like Barbarian. It feels like very Barbarian-esque. Where that one was more so like, oh, obviously you shouldn't let this person stay with you, but then he's not. Like, what's wrong? Yeah.
Yeah. I was going to say, this is not a new movie, but we both loved Barbarian.
Yeah, it was very good.
Yeah, it's a movie where they go for an Airbnb and someone's already staying there and they have to kind of like figure that situation out. And it is chilling because it's real. And I don't even want to say what happens next, but like, if you like horror, that's enticing. Go watch Barbarian. It's a good movie.
Yeah, it is good.
All right, next.
Up
we got
next, The Killer's Game. Dave Bautista.
What?
A veteran assassin is diagnosed with a life-threatening illness and authorizes a kill on himself. After ordering the kill, an army of former colleagues pounce, and a new piece of information comes to light. Insanity ensues. So it's like a comedy action movie with Dave Bautista.
Yeah. This one doesn't really grab me. But I was thinking, like, if I was going to go to the movie, this wouldn't be one I would shy away from. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like,
Yeah.
it's like, this is a movie that I would walk into. I'm like, I want to go see a movie on Friday night. What's a good showing? And if that was happened to be the best showing for me, like, I would go see it, if that makes sense.
Yeah. Yeah. I agree.
Sometimes I do feel, though, that Dave Bautista is always going to be Drax in my brain.
Oh, really?
And I just always feel like, would this movie be better if he was playing Drax in this movie? Same movie, everything else is the same, but he's just also Drax.
Uh-huh. I do, like, at some points in the Dune movies, I do think, like, oh, that was Drax right there.
Oh, interesting.
Because they're both kind of like, they're the muscle and they don't say many words.
Yeah.
And it's Dave Bautista's voice, but it's still like, they're very different hearted characters.
Yeah.
But it is hard to separate when you have such an iconic role.
Right. Good old Drax, right?
Yeah, Dave.
Real fans call him Dave. So let's dive in. Let's do it. Rings of Power.
Yeah. Rings of Power Season 2.
Season 2. So this is going to be kind of our... right now, there are 4 episodes out. We have both seen the first 3. And it's not going to be a spoiler. We're not going to try to be spoiler. It's weird because I don't want to say, like, no spoilers. But that's not really going to be the point of this. We're going to really just talk about the show as a whole and feelings. But it's also, we know what happens after the show. We know what happens before the show if you're a book fan. So it's kind of like, I don't know. I don't feel the need to be super like, no spoilers. Like, if it happens, it happens.
Yeah.
You know?
But it's also like, at this point in the season, we're talking about a show that's not even half released yet.
Right.
So even if we do like talk about a spoiler specific thing and you haven't seen it, I have a feeling it won't be that big of a deal.
Right.
Like, all 3 of these episodes were released on the same night. So they kind of all come as one clump.
Right. One lump sum, if you will.
A lump sum.
So let's start off, like, what are your overall thoughts about the Rings of Power? You like it?
I'm a pretty big fan, actually. Yeah, which, like, I think I'm at a point where if something looks good, and I feel like I come back to the same stuff all the time. If something looks good and sounds good, and the story is interesting, then I'm like, awesome. I'm here for it. Like, I'm gonna keep watching it. And so far, the whole first season I thought it looked amazing, and it was very interesting, and it piqued my curiosity. And the first 3 episodes so far of this season are already starting to answer some questions and give me like the things that I wanted.
Yeah.
So
I think I am definitely positive on this show. I think it's good. It's not great. There's a lot of things that I see the criticism when a lot of people talk about this. But I think it's way more, it gets a lot more hate than I think it deserves. It reminds me a lot of The Acolyte, to be honest, like a lot of the haters. Just like the situation with critics and just like fans. And I saw a reel, it was a comment on a video today that was the host was bashing the Rings of Power, why it sucks, and it's like that's great, that's your opinion. You know, I don't agree with that, but I'm all for the opinions. But what I don't like is the top comment on the video was like, "Oh, I'm so glad I've never watched an episode." And it's just like,
oh man.
And we saw that a lot with The Acolyte, right? That it's like, I don't understand culture where you're watching a video on the Rings of Power, people who are watching this video, listening to our podcast, and the people who are watching this video. So like the guy who commented on this was clearly into that kind of stuff or cared enough about that stuff to hear a review. But then, like, why does he want it to fail? Or they, I don't know. But why did they want it to fail? It's like people are happy it fails, happy it's bad.
Yeah.
But they've never watched it.
So weird.
And we saw so much of that with The Acolyte, too.
Dude, loads and loads. It's like the people that get really aggressive about like, hey, stop defending all of these like properties that are now being produced by billion-dollar companies because they don't have the best interest of the fans in mind.
Mm-hmm.
It's possible that they can make crappy stuff, right? And you're like, yeah, that is possible. What did you think about the show? I never watched it. What?
Yeah.
Like, you took the legs out from your argument of like, if we want to have a conversation about what like billion-dollar production companies are doing to properties, then we can have that talk after you and I have both witnessed the same stuff, you know?
Right.
But I'm immediately uninterested in a conversation about someone's opinion about something that they've not witnessed.
Yeah.
Which I don't think is very radical of me.
Yeah.
And I think you would be right there with me.
Definitely. I was trying to look it up, but shout out to Parker King because he commented on one of our reels and said, "I can't believe Andrew likes The Acolyte. How silly. I haven't watched it." And I'm like,
yeah, so funny.
He gets us.
Yeah.
Because that's just, if you haven't seen the show and you hear bad things that makes you not want to watch it, that's fine. But it feels weird.
But when say that.
Yeah. It feels weird to be like, oh, I hate that show, or I wish it wasn't even made. And it's like, that gets so dangerous when you haven't watched it for yourself. You don't know. And this podcast, we love to be fans of stuff. We want to talk about stuff that we like. I think the most controversial between the two of us we've ever gotten was The Acolyte, because I really didn't like it.
Yeah.
And you liked it. But that's about as intense as we get. But I think there's a lot of things to like about this show. So I'd love to just talk about a couple quick critiques that people have. And then I'd like to just get kind of into what I like about it, because they're like, the critiques are real, Yeah. Some critiques that I have as a big Tolkien fan, I literally have a Tolkien tattoo, is that Galadriel's character is not very similar to what we've seen in the books. She is very warrior focused, and we don't really get that vibe from her. But also, this is thousands of years between, so like there's some wiggle room, right? She should be with her husband this whole time. They should be married, and he is assumed dead, I think they said in the show. Like, yeah, and I'm sure they're just doing that to be like, oh, he's gone, or like, I never found the body, so there is room for him to come back. But it's like, okay, those are differences. There's different tweaks to the lore, but I think they still have done it in a way that's fairly like it could have happened kind of thing. So, and then the biggest critique I have about this new season is, I was just talking to some friends about this earlier today, is there is a scene where an orc father doesn't want to go to war and goes over and comforts his assumedly infant orc kid and orc wife.
And then they see Damrod walk in.
Yes. And then we could get into we should do a whole video on where orcs come from.
Dude.
Because that's a whole other subject, because there's a lot of like, well, they're birthing pits, but then there's also like goblin men, like half orc, half goblin. So there is some reproduction going on. And I don't think Tolkien wanted to explore that. So that's why we don't talk about it.
And I think that's the most interesting part about this is like, if you broke it down, like logistically, would orcs have to reproduce? Like in some orcs, some of them, not like Uruk-hai, which are like maybe the birthing pit kind of things, like when Saruman makes his own or whatever. Like, that's a different conversation if we're going to, whatever. But logistically, would they have to reproduce somehow? I think so. Was it something that Tolkien was interested in exploring? Absolutely not. And you know that from reading all of the books, or any of the books. So it was very jarring. I think that was the one like messed up face that I had through the first 3 episodes. I was like, an orc wife and an orc baby? Right. Are orcs going to have like shield maidens now, where like the women go to battle too? Or are they just like staying home and making maggot-y bread?
They're very big on gender roles in the orc community. But it's interesting because I don't think that's what Tolkien intended. Like there's like Warcraft orcs that are a different race, and like these are beings that were tortured, mutilated, manipulated into a thing. And I like a lot of people say like orcs aren't really a race; they're more of a force. They're a force of nature. They are Sauron's army, and I would say they are enslaved to his will. The one thing I thought would be interesting is if they show that orcs actually do have more of a community before Sauron makes the ring.
Oh,
and that their culture is enslaved after that point. So I was like, that might be kind of interesting to show, but I still feel like they are still they're not like, I'm not trying to like put the orcs down. I feel like I'm trying to be like,
trying to,
I'm not orcist, orcrist, orcrist, because orcrist, biter and beater. Am I right? So I just feel like that was an interesting point, but if they have somewhere to go with it, that's interesting. Yeah. And some tweaks to like Sauron, I think I don't agree with, but also they're trying to make a compelling villain. So some of the critiques I see are if they're trying to make an interesting thing, that it'll be kind of like, we'll see kind of thing, How about you? Do you have some critiques or some things that you've seen that you didn't like beyond what we've talked about?
I think I'm not really seeing the point of Theo's arc continuing. So I watched that and I was like, okay, why are we back here? Because I felt like that kind of wrapped up. Like he was used for a very specific purpose. That purpose was met. Yeah. So I'm wondering where they could possibly go with that. Like connecting him with Isildur might be the only chance that you can like continue him as a character.
Yeah.
So that was a little like after the first 2 episodes of like amazing, I want to see these characters, I'm interested in all these people, and then episode 3 you have like Theo and his arc. You're like, oh, I forgot about that guy. Okay. So that part, like, I hope it's interesting. I hope that it builds into something that's worthy of the screen time. And is the best chance for that to happen with Isildur? Mm-hmm. Probably.
Isildur!
My favorite meme with that scene from Lord of the Rings, it's like, cast into the fire, destroy it. No. My favorite one is when you're at Thanksgiving with your family member and he goes, Isildur, were you past the gravy? And he goes, no. Isildur!
Isildur!
That is something else in this show. I do think a lot of these characters were adding to their lore, and some of the stories don't quite add up. And it's like, I want to give grace because I just like the world. We're getting Lord of the Rings stuff. That's awesome, Yeah. So I want to give some grace there, but that also doesn't mean that I can't like hold it to a standard. So we see a lot of stuff where it's like we see a warrior version of Galadriel, which doesn't fit with what we know or have read about. But okay, the grace comes in where like she could change in the next 1,000 years. And the same thing with
a person might change.
But does an elf change?
Ooh. No.
But then also,
wizards are never late and elves never change.
Maiar, my father-in-law today asked me, because he was watching The Rings of Power, and I got to give a bunch of lore stuff on him. It was so fun. It was just like, cool. He's like, what did he ask me first? He was like, Sauron feels like he's more powerful than an elf. Like, is he an elf? And I was like, Maiar, and blah, blah, blah. Oh, it was so fun. I was like, just call me later if you have any lore questions. Got to use this information somehow, right? So yeah, I think that is another critique, I guess, that it's like some of these characters. Oh, that's what I was going to say, is Elrond is not a warrior, which we see him very warrior-like, especially in Peter Jackson's movies. And then we don't see him. We see him as a great leader in the books. But I feel like we're seeing this, I would say, I mean, to put it bluntly, a weaker version of Elrond that's conflicted. Sure. But it's weird because he is young, actually, because he was born in Middle Earth,
Yeah.
But so I don't know. So I think there's definitely some criticisms, since there's characters they're adding scenes that have never been, there's no basis for them, or they're just straight up adding characters like Theo, and it's just kind of like, right. I don't really love that character, and I feel like anything that's the furthest away from Tolkien is usually where it suffers the most, brand new characters, brand new things,
Yeah. I will say that I have enjoyed this season of Sauron. Season 1, even like the end of season 1, I was like, okay, at this point, how is Halbrand going to fulfill what we know Sauron does? Because he kind of outed himself to Galadriel. And then Elrond, like, why wasn't she telling Elrond? And he found out, like, he's not who he says he is, but who is he?
Yeah.
And then he finds out. And so it's like, okay, but he still has to, like, trick you. So I felt like this, like, season 2, just, they threaded the needle so well with that story arc so far. Where it was like, oh, okay, so this is like the rings are their one chance of surviving. And Elrond, I like that Elrond is the wise one, the cautious one. And that he's like, we don't know for sure that he didn't mess with these. And they're like, what else can he do? Like, he probably didn't. I thought that was an interesting dynamic. And I liked that. And I like his relationship with Celebrimbor. Yeah. Now that he's like maybe revealed himself as a more powerful being than just a man. I felt like that was good because, like, also I've read the books, but I've watched the movies more than I've read the books, and I've always was confused. How did Sauron, who looks like he does in the movies, how does that guy trick elves? Like, how does that guy convince them, hey, I have this jewelry, you should wear it? Like, and they're like, okay, oh, you deceived me. And so this, I guess, is visually and as far as a narrative, like one thread of a story, is enjoyable, and it makes a lot of sense to me. So,
well, and it's definitely the Lord of Gifts is what he calls himself in Anatar, which is very book based. I mean, it is interesting because it is a little confusing. Like, I don't think anyone should know he's Sauron at this point, but Celebrimbor doesn't know, and he reveals himself as Anatar, the Lord of Gifts, which is straight from Tolkien. And I think that scene was played very well. And he's like, I'm here to help you. I'm a higher being.
Oh, he's such a master manipulator.
And I feel like we're seeing that.
Like, he does that so
like, I feel like we didn't see that from him in the first season. But it's like, oh man, we're getting to, they're sticking to some lore stuff here, and it is so cool. And I think a lot of the positives I have about this show are things like this. Like, that is such a great, well done part, and it's like we get to see Sauron in a fair form trick and a master elf builder. And I love how he plays it. So Celebrimbor, I mean, I am such a Tolkien nerd. And if you're listening to this, I assume that you are too. So I'm not going to apologize for it.
Yeah, probably.
But so Celebrimbor's grandfather, right, is Fëanor, the creator of the Silmarils, the greatest craftsman to ever walk Middle Earth. Oh, no, he didn't walk Middle Earth, did he? Because you know what I mean. The greatest craftsman. Crafter of the Silmarils that bore the light of the tree. Anyway.
Nice.
That, so he is like, he pulled on that. Sauron was like, it's like, you're going to be remembered for more than just being the sire of the greatest craftsman. Because like
Yeah.
Celebrimbor is a craftsman. He wants to create something amazing. He wants to create these powerful items, and he wants to be remembered and known for something, not just for being the grandson of someone really great. You know, it's like, oh wow, like talk about. I mean, obviously crafted by Tolkien, but what a cool and such a believable way to pull on someone's desire. Not just like, do you want to be evil? Join me. You know, it's like,
Yeah.
don't you want to be known for something greater than your famous grandfather? You know, it's like, oh.
Yeah. And he even like almost extends the offer for Celebrimbor to be the Lord of the Rings. He's like, you will be known as the Lord of the Rings.
And he's tricksy.
Also, you may have known this, but I just found out because I just looked up Fëanor. He also created the Palantirs.
Yeah.
Palantirs.
Which it's interesting because I feel like it's not quite lore based that they're showing the Palantir as like these crystal balls to show into the future. Like, you know, I don't know. It feels weird because I feel like they're the seeing stones. They can communicate with each other. And so when we're seeing other things, we're seeing like Pippin and Aragorn are seeing like the mind of Sauron. Like he's going to attack Minas Tirith.
Right.
The ring is in Minas Tirith, you know. But I haven't read a lot about that. But regardless, they're super powerful objects. Yeah, Fëanor created a lot of cool stuff. He's a cool guy.
Yeah. Would you maybe say that a Palantir is a dangerous
Yes,
tool?
I would. What's the next line?
Wow.
I blanked on it.
A Palantir is a dangerous tool. Does he say a dangerous thing or a dangerous
We don't know who might be watching.
We don't know who
Why?
is watching.
Why should we fear?
Give it here.
Yeah.
Anyway, I thought of I had a qualm.
A qualm.
So I realized this. Sauron asks, kind of like gives Celebrimbor the eye with the mithril, and he goes like, "Can I put the mithril into the pot?" And he's like, "Oh, of course," and he gets it, and then he kind of goes and drops it, which no one noticed. But I always was under the impression that Sauron never had any physical or immediate magical influence over the rings. He found a way to tap into the magic of the rings with his one ring. Is that
I
accurate?
believe.
Like he tricked them and he was like, "Hey, you guys should make some rings to save yourself." But he was never actually there and didn't actually have a hand in it. And maybe this is for story stuff, but
he never touched the 3 elf rings. That's why they were never fully under his sway. Do you say that he had a hand in crafting them? He was a part of their creation, but I don't know honestly if that's more metaphorical or physical. But I did like that nod because they were showing like, I need to put this in the fire, like literally showing he's touching their creation.
Yeah, like give me a piece of it. Yeah. It made a lot of narrative sense for the story, but I think that I was just under the impression that he influenced the decision to make magical rings and then was able to kind of, because he knew the magic, make the ring based off of the knowledge he knew of the magic. But that would be a little iffy, honestly, in the show.
And it's harder to show, but yeah, it's like, is it metaphorical or did he physically touch them? And it says he touched them, but that also that means multiple things too. But and a lot of other things that I wanted to bring up that I love about the show is I love that we're seeing all these places. Like we're seeing Eregion and Linden, and we're seeing Khazad-dûm in its more glory, you know.
And the gem that is Pelagrir. What a gem.
And there's like, I think it's hard because as a Tolkien fan, I am more apt to enjoy things because I get to see these places for the first time, you know? And it's so I understand that too if the criticism is there. But wow, I just enjoy this show. I enjoy what they're showing. And we have to talk about our friend, our buddy, Bear McCreary.
Pete. Oh, I thought you were going to go Peter Jackson.
We'll get there too.
Okay, all right, Bear McCreary.
He is a phenomenal composer. I mean, me and you both listened to the Demeter soundtrack because it's such a cool soundtrack.
Yeah.
It's a terrible movie. I watched it, by the way. I did not like that movie. It's like, oh,
I hate that movie's guts, and I've
such a
never
weird
seen
premise of a movie. So the Demeter is the ship that took Dracula to England, right? Is that where he ends up? So from Transylvania, and it's funny because, like, you know, Dracula, the book, has all this stuff to do with Transylvania, and then it ends in London and blah blah blah.
Mm-hmm.
And it's so funny that they're like, hey, you know what would be a good movie to do is just the one section where he's on the ship. Like, that's a weird call, right? Like, I was like, okay. But the soundtrack's banging. He does the God of War soundtrack. He does, what else has he done? He's done quite a bit, but just like, man, great soundtrack. And I listened to a podcast episode about him, and he talks about how he wanted the Rings of Power sound-wise, music-wise, to feel like it could be into Peter Jackson's Lord of the Rings, Howard Shore's score. And it feels like that to me. It feels like very much the same world, and I think musically you can go between them very easily.
I totally agree. And that fits with one of my biggest desires for a show like this, which is like, does it sound like it could be in Lord of the Rings? It absolutely does. So it's very comforting to know that Bear McCreary considered that. It was like, it needs to like kind of fit together. Like, they're unique and they're their own. Yeah. And at the end of episode 3, when that like Rings of Power I think it's the main title, plays, I was like, it's on a playlist that I have. And I was like, oh, I know this song so well. Like, if I hear it, I'll know immediately it's the Rings of Power over the Fellowship or Return of the King or something like that. So
yeah. Oh, it's so good. So there's some things too that I'm excited for that we're going to get to, which we haven't seen in the show yet. Maybe it's in episode 4, which I have not seen yet. But just listening to the soundtrack, you get a Tom Bombadil song. Mm-hmm. You get a what are those creatures called that Tom Bombadil saves the hobbits from? The Whites, right?
Oh, yeah. Mm-hmm.
What are those called? Barrow Whites.
You're right. Yeah.
And so we know they're going to be in the show. Tom Bombadil is, and his song is beautiful. Like, I listened to it, and so I haven't seen him in the show yet, but just the song, I'm like, he plays like a version of what he sings in the Fellowship of the Ring, the book, which we never got to see just happen. And he sings a version of that song, and it is so... I've always heard the Tom Bombadil song played as like a happy little jig kind of thing, and it's more silly. But it feels to me like just a very... Like they're tapping into some part of Tom Bombadil that is the whimsical, but it's just a beautiful song. Yeah. You know? And my big thing with the Rings of Power, I'm going to be very bold with this statement. I think there are things in the Rings of Power that the showrunners, that the composer understand about Tolkien and touch things on Tolkien that are better than Peter Jackson's The Lord of the Rings.
Oh, cool. Okay.
And it's things. I'm not saying the show. The Lord of the Rings are my favorite movies of all time. But there are elements that I think we don't have time in a epic movie to get to all the little nuances. And so I just like some things that I think just show some Tolkien love. Like, we didn't get to see Tom Bombadil or the Barrow Whites in the Fellowship of the Ring because it's too long.
Yep.
And we get to see him in the show. How cool is that? You know, I think this show understands the music. It understands the nature aspect, the love of forests and trees, which Peter Jackson did definitely touch on that. But even just like the elf armor, like,
oh man,
where it's like it's
the face of the
tree
on his chest.
Yeah, and it's like there's elements like that like they know that what Tolkien loved, and you can say, Peter Jackson's movies are better than The Rings of Power, and I would wholeheartedly agree with you.
Yeah.
But there are elements that they touch on in this show that are sides of Tolkien. I think Tolkien's work is so much bigger than even Peter Jackson's movies.
Yeah.
And I think it's cool to see that they're like, what are these cool little touches or pieces that maybe we didn't have time for, or it wouldn't have fit? Would an old man running down a path singing a merry jig work in the Fellowship of the Ring movie? Probably not. But it's cool that we get to see it now.
Yeah. Oh, I cannot wait. You have been talking to me about that song for weeks.
Yep.
And I've not listened to it because I want to hear it for the first time when I see Tom Bombadil. Yeah. And then I will listen to it incessantly, I promise.
Yeah.
I'll send you a voice memo of me crying.
Yeah. Yeah, and I brought up before that how the first season of Rings of Power is so tied to when my daughter was born, and just like newborn phase and stage, and we're just trying to like figure that out as new parents. And then like I'd watch this show, and I feel like, the just like the heart of that show, the whimsicalness, the magic, I feel like is really tied to Lucy for me. And it's cool to see that continue. And I think that hit home for me as well. So that's all I've got on this. I think it's definitely a show. I think we'll do another episode that's like a full-on review of season 2. But I just wanted to kind of share our thoughts. Like, there's some good, there is definitely some negative, but it's one of those shows where it's like, I think it's getting, like, it deserves better. It deserves better reviews. It deserves better watching. And I love that we get to see Tolkien's world. So, what do you have? You have some final thoughts or some kind of wrap-up comments?
Man, one of the things that I wrote down after episode 2 was elves shave.
Yeah.
Because Círdan was shaving with a seashell, by the water. But then, so that was like, oh, that's kind of silly. Like, you never considered, do elves shave?
Círdan
and then
shaves seashells. Something like that.
A scruffy Círdan shaves his seashell shave face.
Shamelessly.
I don't know. Shamelessly. So I was like, oh, that's kind of silly. Yeah, elves could shave. Orcs could have babies, maybe. But then to follow that with the most intense, description to Elrond of why it's okay for them to use the Rings of Power. And I was like, whoa. Like, with his example with the fish, and he's saying, like, Elrond, we can handle this. Other creatures, probably not, but we can handle it. And I think because we can handle it, we should handle it. Like, we have a responsibility to handle it. So that is an interesting dynamic I'm super interested in, that, like, the elves acknowledging their power to handle power and be pretty responsible for the most part, until someone like Morgoth or Sauron comes along and corrupts and deceives. So that is something I'm really excited about. I think, he says, do not let the fear of power blind you to its potential for good. Yeah. So that stuck out to me.
Which, those are really interesting elements. Like,
yeah.
Should you shun away from that power? Can you use it wisely?
Yeah. Just because you're afraid. And then the last thing that I wanted to talk about is I'm beyond excited for the show, but I'm also really excited for after the show when we get like a VFX breakdown of everything that they've done, because that was one of the cool things about season 1 was seeing all of the forced perspective stuff with the Harfoots and the stranger Gandalf.
Yeah. You think it's Gandalf?
I think it's Gandalf. If it's not Gandalf, that I will be really happy because they tricked me, but I am so devoted to it being Gandalf.
Yeah.
But anyway, I just like, I think it was season 2, or no, not season 2, episode 2, or was it episode 1? when we get their little stint through the desert. They're getting followed and stuff.
I can't remember. It's hard because I watched them all back to back. So I'm not sure.
So in that section, just go back and, like, if you're listening to this, go back and rewatch that section, because they interact so much, and the camera work is outstanding. There's like
beautiful scenes, beautiful shots.
Oh, when Poppy and Nori are like splashing water on his face, giving him water to drink. It's like a bottom up shot of their faces, and they're like, "No, please, come on, drink some water." And then it cuts to his face, and there are these tiny little hands just like pouring water into his mouth. And it's like, you got children. You had to have children on set in costume, because their hands are like the size of his mouth.
Yeah.
And that was the shot is like, it's a full second at most. It might be half a second. And I was like, the attention to that detail of forced perspective, of like actor replacements, is just so impressive. And I love that. It gets me so pumped.
You know, you brought up earlier, I will say this too. I always wrap up and then I have more stuff to say. That did make me think, because you talked about people, taking properties and like making them, not making, like, when they suck. They suck.
Sure.
They're terrible. I think a big thing for me why The Lord of the Rings was so successful is everyone involved in that project, from the guy who was paid, a couple bucks to paint something on the side of a hill, or a set, to Peter Jackson. Everyone involved loved what they were doing, loved the project, and wanted to make it great. There's projects that I don't feel like people love, and I think, to me, Halo stands out, the Halo TV show.
Yeah.
It's like the main actor comes out and talks about how he refuses to put on the helmet, and he's like, get over it. And it's like, then you don't love Halo. I don't think you love Halo. And I would say this, if you like the Rings of Power or you hate it, I think the people involved love this world and love this show.
For sure.
And I think you can feel that way. And if you're like, that's not what I envisioned, but I think you have to admit that they love what they did and they love this project.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. It makes it really, really fun.
Yeah. Andrew, you know what to do.
Should I take them home?
Take us home.
Whoa. Thanks for watching, everyone. Thanks for listening. As always, you can find our full video show on YouTube. You can get our audio podcasts wherever you get podcasts. You can follow us on Instagram, Your Feature Presentation. And tune in next week. We'll be talking about
Skeleton Crew.
Skeleton Crew. Way to hit it out of the park with that one, Heath.
I was ready.
So we go back to back, Lord of the Rings, Star Wars conversations. It's a great time to be alive. As always, go see a movie.
Go see a movie.